All right, so for this video, we're going to look at what happens when you take a monomial and you raise it to a power. So what I want you to think about first is what this talks about here. That remember that 3x cubed y squared, if you cubed that whole thing, cubing something means repeating it 3 times. So writing it out 3 times and multiplying it. And so for a lot of you, that's going to be very helpful. It's more writing and a little bit more work to do that, but you are more likely to get the answer correct. So for example, for this one, 3xy, if you took that and you cubed it, what does that mean? It means 3xy times 3xy times 3xy. And now you're going to think of this in terms of multiplying monomials. What's 3 times 3 times 3? That's 27. What's x times x times x? That's x cubed. And what's y times y times y? That's y cubed. So you certainly do not have to show this line, but a lot of you are going to find it helpful to be writing that out and thinking about it. You can certainly do that work in your head if you want, or you can break it down and think, what's 3 cubed? That's 27. What's x to the 1 cubed? That's x cubed. What's y to the 1 cubed? And that's y cubed. So all I will require you to do is the final answer, but I would highly recommend for a lot of you showing that middle step. So again, if we look at this next one, what does squaring something mean? It means writing it out twice. So we're going to take the negative 2xy squared and we're going to write it twice. Now this one, be very careful because negative 2, and that's what this doesn't show up very well, but they're both negatives. Negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4. So be careful. X times x is x squared, and y squared times y squared becomes y to the 4. Again, you can skip right to that answer. You can ask yourself, what's negative 2 in brackets squared? And that would be 4. What's x to the 1 squared? That's x squared. And what's y squared squared? And that's y4. What you're actually doing here, if you are skipping steps, is you're actually using the power to a power rule, which says when raising a power to a power, you multiply the exponents. So if we look at this next one, I'll show you what you could do if you wanted to skip steps. You could, in your head, think, what is negative 2 cubed? So what is negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2? And that is negative 8. Then you can think, well, what's a to the 1 cubed? So what's a times a times a? And that's a cubed. What's b cubed? And then cubed. So that means b cubed times b cubed times b cubed. And you're going to end up with b to the 9. And c to the 4 cubed means c to the 4 times c to the 4 times c to the 4. And you'll get c to the 12. So if you notice, what we did with the exponents here was we multiplied. 4 times 3 is 12, 3 times 3 is 9. But again, if that's confusing to you, all you need to do is write it out 3 times and then take your time and take your steps, and you will get the right answer. This last one is definitely the most complicated one, because if you look at it, the middle term is squared, but the first term and the last term are not. So what you cannot do is you can't go straight to just multiplying them together, because you first have to deal with the exponent in the middle term. So one way of doing it is to just write out that middle term twice. So to do 3x squared y times negative 2x squared y cubed, and that's not showing up very well, sorry about that, times negative 2x squared y cubed times xy squared, and then go straight to what it would be equal to. That's a negative 2. That's one way of doing it. So do that and then get your answer. What's 3 times negative 2 times negative 2 times 1? And you will end up with 12. And what's x squared times x squared times x squared times x to the 1? And you will end up with 7. And what's y times y cubed times y cubed times y squared? And you will end up with 9. That is one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is to simplify this middle part first. So the first part still stays as 3xy. The middle part, however, becomes positive 4 because negative 2 squared is positive 4, becomes x to the 4, x squared squared is x to the 4, and becomes y to the 6 because y cubed times y cubed is y to the 6, and then write the last one. And then go to your answer of 3 times 4 times 1 is 12. X2 times x4 times x is x to the 7. Y times y6 times y squared will be y to the 9. They both give you the same answer. They're just two different ways of showing the work. And then this is also in your notes, so just make sure you read this and watch out. Be really careful of the sign. In term 1, we learned about what happens when a negative is inside the brackets and an exponent is even. And we ended up concluding that you'll always get a positive answer. If the exponent is odd, however, you'll always get a negative answer. And so don't forget those things that we learned in term 1, because they're important.